Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Office Hours. It's great to have you here this morning. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Generally, our first hour is about a regular discussion of production-related questions. The second hour is where we take a dive into a deeper dive into a topic. Today, we're going to be looking at mastering and export for delivering digital files out into the world, something that was easy when I started my career, and it isn't easy anymore. For those of you who occasionally have maybe something like you need to deliver to broadcast, or you just are trying to figure out what's the best way to master a file and get it out into a particular system, that's what we're going to be talking about. So welcome to the show, and we're going to dive right into our questions as always. Mitch, what have we got this morning?
Thank you, Bill. Our first one kicks in from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. He wants to know, is there a diagram for the current office hour system? Thanks.
And the first, we don't have any, oh, there we go. John Wallace is going to weigh in on this. Sorry about that.
I believe there is a system diagram on Discord. I don't know how up to date it is, but it is something I reviewed before because I am trying to build a similar beast.
Oh, nice. Alex has probably as much information about this as anybody on the planet. Alex,
no, actually, I don't. The system is way deeper. I think Tlaloc is probably deeper into it, or some of the team that's actually building it. But I will say that I think that we covered a lot of it, and you see some of it. I think on the last State of the 2.0, we didn't really go into the diagram, but if you go to the one before that, I don't think the diagram has changed dramatically. But a lot of the features are changing, and we expect the features to change a lot over the next month. So I don't know if I'd worry too much about the diagram right now. So we expect a lot of changes in the next couple of days that will affect our trajectory over the next 6 weeks.
I think, though, if you do look at the diagram, you'll be amazed at how complex what we do every day is.
The upshot, the 10,000 foot view, is that there's an interface that's running in the on AWS that's the interface on Universe that's talking to Isadora. Isadora is making those decisions. Isadora talks to MixEffect Pro, which talks to the ATEM. So those are the big pieces. Mukana supplies information based on what's happening, who's answering the questions, and so on and so forth. But those are the broad, very, very broad strokes. And we use SPX for the graphics. And so SPX gets data from Mukana and is controlled by Isadora. That's a very, very big generalization. But the flow graph, there is some graphs out there, and we'll see. We'll be talking a lot about this in October. We're going to be figuring out the trajectory change in September, doing some tests. October will be a lot of us figuring, reorganizing based on new opportunities. So there'll be we've got a lot of things happening in September to kind of get ready for that. But probably the second week of October will be busy, for the couple weeks as we make the changes.
And Sky, you had a comment to slip in?
Well, Alex, you had mentioned yesterday that there were also changes in after hours.
Yeah. So after hours, you'll get an email probably during the show with a new link. We'll also post it in Discord, and I believe it's being posted inside of Mukana here. After hours has been moved from the 090 group to the office hours group inside of Zoom. So a new setup has been built, a new after hours, and so that'll be the first step. So starting today, we'll be moving into the new after hours, and then hopefully over the next week we'll get to a point where we don't need the webinar anymore either. So that's going to be kind of the two-step. I think that at first we were going to do it all at one time, and then we decided to do it one piece at a time, especially given IBC. So that will, but you'll see us kind of step over into that. I think that the panelists will stay still in a separate one, but we are going to create a separate meeting, that is within office hours for the panelists. So the panelists will get a new link as well, but that's still coming. Yeah.
So you can see this is an ever-evolving experiment in global internet community and broadcasting. It's very exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, between now and November 1, we should see a lot of change. Like you'll see, this is the first step of that, but over the next, about the next 6 to 7 weeks, you're going to see a lot of moving parts. So some of it will work and some of it may not work perfectly at first, but we're pretty excited about it.
Excellent. Let's get to the next question.
Guy Cochran from Seattle, USA, and on the panel. What's new and exciting with Ultimatte?
We're going to start with Alex.
So the math, I think, hasn't changed with Ultimatte. It is, Ultimatte has been pretty much the same since they bought it. What they did at first was they took the way Ultimatte was making their hardware and they brought it down to surface mount. They made it a lot more efficient, but they kind of kept it the same. The problem really is that it had some old things in it that made it hard, like the control board. It was expensive. It was still expensive. It was a lot less. Just put it in perspective. I had Ultimatte 11, which was a 3G 444 Ultimatte, and that was $33,000. When after they bought it and put out the new box, they dropped it to about $15,000 with the controller. The controller unit was about $4,000 or $5,000, and then the box was about that. And so anyway, so they dropped it down there, and then now what they've done is made it a much more widely available. So there's a small little unit that has that it is a single unit. I think it's $495, and it's just like a little Ultimatte, like that'll do the single channel for HDMI. And then there's an HD version. There's a 4K version. I think the 4K version is still only $1,600 or $2,500, $24.95, something like that. And then I believe that the 8K version is $59.95. The interesting thing about the 8K, you may go, why I'm not going to key 8K. But the only thing there's two things. But the big thing is that, because the funny thing is that Blackmagic makes an 8K camera that can't actually output 8K. So we couldn't get 8K out of the 8K cameras the 12K cameras that they have. Anyway, but what's interesting from what I've read, and I have to do some research because I think this has all happened last night, but what's interesting is that it appears that you can do 4 channels of 4K in the 8K, which would mean that it's about $1,750 a channel, which is now went from $33,000 a couple years ago down to $1,750. So it's a huge change, and what that means is you'd have one box that could theoretically do a virtual studio. So you basically, and the way to think about how the Ultimatte works is the Ultimatte has an SDI in that's the background, and then it has an SDI in that's the foreground. And you key the foreground, put it over the background, and it does a pretty good job. What you can do is, if you had tracking, if you had a Panasonic, 150, or you had something that Moses or other things that would track it, a Stipe, you would be able to take the Unreal Engine output, feed it into Ultimatte, have 3 different views, and be able to move the cameras and everything else and get that key. That's the big thing that Ultimatte would let you do. There's keyers built into a lot of these, Stipe and a lot of the other ones. They're good, and they've gotten much better, but they're not as good as Ultimatte. Like a dedicated piece of hardware that does the thing. So your ability you could now build a virtual set. You spend $6,000 on this, $7,000 on this on the Ultimatte. And then you'd have 4 of them. Now, the other thing they did is the controlling unit used to be $5,000. They've now rolled that into software. So now you could just open up a computer and control the keyers. And usually you don't have to, you're not animating the keyers. So you just have to get to each one, set the keyers the way you want. So I think that it's pretty revolutionary. Remember that all of the processing is in 422. So the one thing that Blackmagic didn't do was provide a 444 pipeline. So you do want to think about the idea of going, if you're going to do this, is to key at 4K, even if you're going to go out to 1080p. 1080p, 4K 422 will give you very similar effects that you would have with 1080p 444, because you have all the pixels there to key. And when you scale it down, they'll mush together. So you get a much better key at 4K if you have 4K cameras. Now, if you just want to key your 6K, then you can just get the little one for $495. It will do a better job. It gives you far more control and will pull a better key than your ATEM. Your ATEM is magical, but this is a whole different level of keying capability. So anyway, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. Mitchell?
Yeah, as long as I can remember, Ultimatte was always the ultimate matting system. In hardware, it used to be you'd run like 3 tape decks off of it, your foreground, your background, and you would have a Hicon or key coming out of, or a mat. And it was just really brilliant at the way that it was able to deal with edges and things like that and the adjustments. So I bought it when it turned into software that Ultimatte made available, and it was a dongle, and it plugged right into my After Effects. And it worked nearly as well, but not quite as well. But it was almost a real-time operation. And now that our friends at BlackMagic has it, as Alex was saying, they've improved it in so many different ways. But the biggest improvement most recently is the price drop. So it's put it into the hands of the average person. So you could have one if you use backgrounds a lot and you don't mind parting with about $3,000. You can have the real thing. The A10's pretty good, but the Ultimatte is the ultimate.
And Courtney.
Well, according to their website, the new top end one, the Ultimatte 12 8K, is now about $7,000, $6,995. And according to them, they've improved the color science, the edge blending, and has new amazing color fidelity and better spill suppression than ever before. So that's according to their website. And here's what the unit looks like if you haven't seen it. There's a lot of inputs back there for doing 8K because, Alex, doesn't it require 4 separate SDI inputs per layer or per?
Yeah, it's 4 12Ks.
4 12Ks, right?
48K signal.
To get that 8K in there. So
no, 48G. Sorry, 48G.
Yeah, 48 gigabits. To get all those signals in and out, you're going to have a forest of cables going into your rack there. Can't do it in software.
There you go. And Alice, you had another thought?
I'll just say that you could, someone who was astute at programming could probably do something that is at least as good as the Ultimatte on a Mac Mini 8 gig at this point. Like that, to give you a sense of how powerful the Mac Minis are. We were doing real-time 1080p uncompressed keying with a Mac laptop with Conduit in 2008. So that's 14 years ago. So the Mac Minis are a lot faster. So with that and an input card or input thing, you could probably pull pretty amazing keys. So I think that this piece of hardware is great. I think that what the next step for BlackMagic is to start innovating. This is just incremental. I mean, it's bringing the price down. It's revolutionary and disruptive. But I think that it would be great to see someone innovate a little bit more because there's a lot of things you need to do to analyze screens. Do much more complex composites. Ultimatte has been the high end of this for a long time. But for instance, we didn't use it because we had something that we had more control over, and that's available. And if you just took if BlackMagic just took some of the tools that they have in Fusion and rewrote them to operate in real time, it would work.
And Mitch had a final word.
It also requires Alex in a box to make that M1 version. So that's a tough addition.
It's not Poly. It requires Poly in a box. He was the programmer.
Let's move on to the next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Paul asks, who are the interviewers and who are the camera and sound people on the ground at IBC?
Well, this is going to be exciting for those of you who might be joining. I don't know. I don't know if it's possible that you've missed what we're going to be doing on Saturday, but Office Hours is going back to live on the show floor convention style at IBC, the International Broadcast Convention in Copenhagen, Denmark, or no, the Netherlands. Anyway, it's going to be an exciting Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Right. Thank you. I don't know why I moved it to Copenhagen. That would be a real mess to do that at the last minute.
To do it there, yeah. It'd be fun to do it in Copenhagen.
True. Anyway,
Amsterdam's nice.
We're going to Amsterdam. We'll be live on Saturday, starting pretty early in the morning. So keep track of all those little things. But Guy Cochran's going to give us some hints.
Yeah, looking at the back end master sheet here, it looks like for reporters, we have Emma Bainbridge as a reporter, and our very own John Barker as well is going to be reporting live, boots on the ground. We also have Richard Lavery helping out, Ken Jordan, Denise Lahat, along with her husband, Nissan Lahat, Chris Ward, and Stefan Fisher, and Spike Rogers, all on the ground.
So it'll be fun. I hope we get a chance to see a little bit of the city around it because from everything I've seen, it's a beautiful place. I was scheduled to go right before the pandemic, and I had a client come in and Bigfoot me, and I wasn't able to use the plane tickets that I had, and I was really disappointed because I have had a lot of friends who've gone to Amsterdam, and they say it's just an absolutely wonderful city and a fun place. So maybe we'll get to see some of that on Saturday. So tune in for our Saturday coverage here at Office Hours. Next question.
From Guy Cochran in Seattle. Guy asks, Isadora announced Izzycast. Any ideas what this is?
Alex, can you help us?
They publish what it was? Is it published? What?
It is on Facebook. They announced that it was going to be a Zoom connection, high quality Zoom connection, and something I didn't fully understand everything.
Yeah, so I believe that, you know, given that it's Isadora, it's about moving data from one place to another in the world. You know, so I think Izzycast. I don't know. I think there'll be more information about that. We should probably ask on Saturday morning. So come Saturday morning, we'll talk about it. I'm not sure what I officially know and don't. So I'm not gonna. I was trying to find it. I didn't realize it was just on Facebook because I couldn't find it anywhere else of what they've announced. So, but I think that we'll get more information in the next day or two.
Absolutely. John Wallace, you had a thought before we leave it?
Yeah, it looks like they're saying that you can move high quality audio and video from anywhere to anywhere. Their extension of the Zoom SDK looks like their partner with Zoom released an alpha version already. So that's what's available on their Facebook post, and hopefully we find out more.
Great. Well, we'll be able to dig in and get the details. That's the magic of office hours, is we'll be on the show floor with somebody who knows a ton.
And we'll work on getting Mark back on to talk about it as soon as things settle down. I think that they have other things going on right after IBC, and of course IBC is going to be busy. But as soon as Mark slows down a little bit, we'll get them on and we'll have them really dig into the whole thing. And we're really excited about the updates to Isadora. I think they've been working on some pretty dramatic changes.
And next question.
Bipin Abraham from Pune, India, using a BlackMagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, need to shoot a few talking head videos for which I intend to finalize the color grade in the edit. Should I shoot RAW, or would something with a little more compression like ProRes 422 in the film log be good?
And Sky's got to start us out here.
Well, everything is easy once you know how. And so I would say do a test on your system, because putting BlackMagic inside of DaVinci is awesome and you get amazing color. But again, I don't know what your storage is, how long your interview is. And consequently, in its native environment, BlackMagic 4K inside of a DaVinci Resolve is fantastic for color. But again, you may not be that may not be your tool of choice. So I would say do a 3-minute test in both formats, and then see what you're most comfortable with your workflow, because just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And Alex?
Yeah, it depends on how fast you have to turn the edit. So it will be a little bit, if you don't know Resolve and you need to turn it quickly, you may find that 422 is fine. But at that point, I wouldn't shoot it in log. I would just shoot it. I would figure out a LUT that made sense and do it in linear and move forward. 422 is a linear level. You should not shoot log in 422. You can do 422 HQ, and that will probably get you enough information if you had to do it that way. If it's an interview that matters, shoot it in the raw format. That's going to give you the most amount of data. It just means that there's more work on the other side for you to make the conversion. If you're using Final Cut to edit, you'll need to take it into Resolve to convert it to Apple ProRes, because Final Cut doesn't natively open RAW. I do believe you can natively open it in Premiere, though. So I think that it will open there. So those are the couple of things you have to kind of. So as always, it depends, but it is generally. I would always shoot in RAW if I could, because you want to get all that information. You can't go back and shoot it again and get exactly what you got before. So it's just easier to start with all the data, and then you can always take it into Resolve and do just do a first pass, just get it close to straight conversion, and then you always can go back to something that has more data if you find out that you need it. But I would capture it at the highest resolution and the highest quality that I could out of the camera.
Next question.
Alex Buckland in North UK. I have a Logitech StreamCam and a Mac. Is there anything I can do to get that nice depth of field effect, the blurred background?
And Courtney's going to start us off.
Well, it's going to be tough because that camera is kind of a fixed focal length, although it is a focusable lens and it has autofocus on it. You'd probably have to position yourself fairly close to the camera and let it focus to get a natural bokeh out of it. Of course, there's artificial means of generating bokeh, which maybe you can find. Maybe it comes with an app that lets you blur the background and have it AI automatically detect you or the face in the foreground and can blur the background. But we tend to frown on that here because it never does a very good job, and the edges of the face get incorporated into the blur sometimes, and so it reveals itself fairly easily. But as far as, it doesn't have a true aperture in it, so you can't really open up the aperture because it probably just uses variable sample time to change its exposure. And so that's not really going to affect your depth of field. So I think your only hope, and it's a fairly wide angle lens. I think it's about an 8-degree lens. So you're going to have to be fairly close to it. So you may not be able to frame it like you want to see it to get that bokeh effect. John Wallace.
I agree with Courtney. The biggest thing is, do you want people focusing on the little objects that are floating around your head or what you're actually talking about? I'd focus more on just a really good shot, really clean video, good lighting, more than the background being blurred.
Alex.
If you have an M1, I know that there is a actual blur processing in the M1 that can be used that is, I find, to be a little better than the one in Zoom. So the Zoom one is the reason you see so many edges on the Zoom one is because they're blurring too much. And so by just blurring a little bit, it doesn't look as unacceptable. You do have to still have good lighting and good contrast between the foreground and the background to make that work. But it can be done a little bit. I have a feeling that, and I haven't tried it, but I have a feeling that the iPhones might be able to use the depth camera to do portrait video out, but I don't know how to do it with the web cameras. I will say that the new Insta360 camera definitely has a larger sensor, and you definitely get more depth of field or shorter depth of field than you get with the Logitechs.
Fair enough. Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego. James asked, during the Apple event, the panel discussed the manifest. Please explain where to find the manifest and what information it contains.
Alex is going to help us here.
Yeah, so almost everything you see that you get is done by HLS. So the HLS is the standard format that everything goes out in. And how that works is it first puts everything in chunks. So there's basically a group of frames, and those groups of frames are typically in 2-second groups. Although I think that, well, anyway, and then those are in 2-second frames, and then these are stacked into this is, think of this as like 60 frames, 60 frames, 60 frame, and then these are put into segments. And these segments are kind of like, but they literally are like a train track, and these are like boxes of images. And so these boxes of images get put onto one of the railroad cars, and they start going. Now the thing is that there's a whole bunch of them. So there's not one railroad car. There is typically 8 of them, or 6 of them, or 5 of them that are all going. And one is at 1080p. Oftentimes one is at lower 1080p, like, oh, you don't have quite enough bandwidth, but we'll do it there. Another one might be 720p, 540p, 240p, that kind of thing. So they go down in quality, but all of them are being created all the time. And they're being put up on the server, and they're what happens is it's kind of a shell game. What happens? You have an origin. The origin goes out to the edge. When someone asks for so when your phone asks the server for a segment, says, give me one of those segments, I need, and keep them coming. That's the stream. It's not really streaming to you. It's the origin sends the segment over, and then it sends it to you. Once it's there, it has a time of life, and what it means is that if anybody within the next couple of seconds asks for it, it says, oh, I already got that. I can send it to you too. Now, how do you know which one to grab? Well, what it does is it looks at how fast you're pulling down those images, how fast you're pulling those segments down. And the manifest tells the player what's available. So the manifest says, here is, we always, for some reason, I always think of it as this kind of bitter old man at the ship dock going, I got you a 1080p, I got you a 720p, I got what do you need? And the player's like, oh, I think I might have a 720. Are you sure? You think probably take a 1080? So it tells the player makes the decision about what it wants. The manifest tells it what's available. And what's really complicated about that, when you open up the manifest, it can be very, very long, because you're writing a manifest for players that don't know know about certain things. Like some players don't know about HDR. So you have to put it in a way that it gets what it needs and doesn't get confused by, hey, what's HDR? You know, like, you know, and then it tries to play it and it can't play it. It all comes out all messed up. So, you know, or the HDR one hits the SDR one first. You know, so these are all things that you have to kind of think about when you do that. And so the manifest is a very complex system, not complex, it's a simple text file that describes all of the things that are available. There can be the SDR, the HDR, the SDR with ASL, the HDR with ASL. You know, like all of these all these things are there. All the languages that might be available, all the captions that might be available, all of these things are all defined and handed to the player from the manifest. To get to the manifest, what we do is we go into developer mode in Safari or Chrome, and they both have two different manifests, by the way. Safari can see HDR and Chrome typically can't. You go into the developer mode and you search for M3U8. So you do a search for M3U8. You'll see one string that's the M3U8. The M3U8 is that you take that M308 and you open it in Chrome, because Chrome doesn't know what an M308 is. So you put an M308 in and Chrome just says, I can just save the file out. It doesn't know that it's something that it should do something with. It just saves it to the desktop or wherever you want to save it. That's a text file. And then you open it up and that's your manifest. So that's how you grab onto the manifest. So that's the little, I'll give you the little, I can't talk about that. So anyway, so it's the but anyway, so that's how you get to the manifest. And when you dig through it, it tells you everything that they're streaming. So we saw yesterday that we saw SDR, we saw a definition of some stuff was stereo, 2-channel only. Some of it was Atmos, defined as Atmos, and so they were definitely streaming. And Mickey confirmed that he opened it up and saw 12 frames. If you haven't watched our version of watching keynotes, you should, because it's a fun thing, because we don't get caught up. I mean, we look at the products, that's great, but we spend a lot of time digging into the stream, talking about production, and we'll spend another piece of time. And what we'll do is we will break down the keynote in the next week or two. And when we do that, I'll open up the manifest and we'll look at it, and I'll circle like what the manifest actually looks like and what different things mean in the manifest that's there.
I'm going to take half a second and expand my brain a little bit to keep all of that information. Okay, now I'm done. Let's go on. Mitchell, great explanation.
I was just going to say, I like the old man metaphor, but I think it's more like Mr. Haney from Green Acres. Well, Mr. Douglas, you got your 720, your 1080?
Maybe. I know. For some reason, every time I think of the manifest, I just think of some guy on a dock. Man, what do you want here? I got a bunch of boxes of 720.
Well, I don't know, Mr. Douglas.
If all you got is a slow connection, I guess
I think it depends on what part of the country your server lives in.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's back there? Anyway, that was fun. Great. Good job, everybody involved in that. Let's move on to the next question.
And it's from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What are the top 6 media shows like IBC, Naam, etc., that are most important to you to see in live stream? How would you cover them?
We're going to start with Mitchell.
My favorites are NAB, the classic. And I also like the NAB on the East Coast, which is really the AES, the Audio Engineering Society. In between, Cinegear, SIGGRAPH, those all seem to make sense. I think we've already done a great job of covering all those. And I'm really excited to see what happens on Saturday at IBC.
Sky?
I'm thinking CES, but you inspired me, Paul, because, of course, South by Southwest is becoming a media event and an experience. And then that, of course, took me and spun me off onto what is, if I couldn't attend, an experience that is currently doing the best, giving me the show of everything. And I think it's football. For me, it's NFL football. Is at least that's where my affinity goes to, and how they take me to a different location every 3 days and really give me the different perspectives, the behind the scenes, the action in the thing. But what I also recognized is we're kind of missing out being in the experience and absorbing it and interpreting it ourselves, because we're waiting for somebody else to tell us what we just saw, or we're waiting for the replay. I was at a live event the other day, and then I was looking around and I was like, oh, right. There's no replay. It's live. Oh, right.
So Reality doesn't have a still store.
Yeah.
Go figure. Sky finished. Courtney, please.
Well, for AV stuff, Infocom is a fairly important convention because it covers a lot of projectors and audiovisual equipment and stuff that's used in large meeting halls, things like that. So that's always an important convention. I think it's going to be in Florida next year.
All right. I think we covered the landscape pretty well. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida. Opinion, slowly arcing the camera during monologue. I found the moving background distracting during the Apple presentation. Good or bad technique?
And we're going to start with Courtney.
Well, this is one of my pet peeves. I don't really like it. A lot of DPs and directors, I got to have some movement in there. And, I'll show up with a teleprompter for doing teleprompted pieces like the Apple piece. And, we want to put the camera on a slider and constantly have it moving. That means that the person who's reading off the teleprompter has to constantly move his head and watch the teleprompter as it goes. And it gives me kind of a creepy effect because it looks like somebody is, watching you rather than just presenting something to you. And the other bad thing about all the moving background is it increases your compression overhead. So if you're doing a live streaming event, it's going to definitely affect your bandwidth.
And Sky. Oops, Sky, are you unmuted?
I apologize.
That's right.
Go ahead and move on. I was replaying something.
Yeah. All right. I wonder in the back of my mind if that is part because we've got a few generations now of kids who grew up in video games, particularly the first person kind of role playing games, and they're constantly in motion. So they watch content all day long and their point of view is always shifting. You almost always in those games, you never get a static frame that things happen in unless it's designed for really young kids. So I wonder if that's affecting.
I think Brian De Palma created this years ago when he put the camera on the Lazy Susan and during a dialogue scene, would circumnavigate the two people talking constantly with them moving and you going one shoulder, other shoulder.
Hershey, did you have a thought?
Yes, I did. So I want to have a discussion or a question. During the AirPod segment, the person that was reading, you could tell that they were reading. It was, so on my ears, it was quite fatiguing listening to that segment. And then towards the end, there was another segment where it was reviewing the phone, but in a artistic way. And there was a script there. So being that we have Courtney here on the panel, what was, in that shot, let's just say an AirPod shift as if they were reading a teleprompter in front of them? Because that's what my brain was told. I didn't really see the imagery or the video. But when
Courtney,
I was
you want to
listening
respond
to it on
before we
my phone,
go to Sky?
Yep.
I don't want to mess with the back end, but
there was a teleprompter, and Alex remarked at the time that he could hear the pauses, and maybe that's what you were commenting on, or that's what he was commenting on. Because when you prepare a teleprompter script, you don't run all the text together. You put some blank lines in there that are breaks between sentences a lot of times, just to give the person a landmark, because they're reading text that's moving up the screen. And if they look away to look natural at something, if they're not dead on focus following the screen the entire time, they can lose their place. When they come back to the screen, the text is moved, so it's not where it was when they looked away, and so they have to take a second to find their place. So we put in blank lines so that they have some landmarks to follow as that goes up the screen. But some readers, unfortunately, put a big blank pause in there at the blank line, and that's, I think Alex can chime in here on if that's what was driving him nuts. But
we call it the teleprompter pentameter.
Yeah, yes.
When people read it, Apple has
it does deliver a
a
certain type of style of delivery. As far as the eye contact goes, they pretty much all were. I think they were all reading off a teleprompter, and maybe some of them had rehearsed well enough to work off a memorized presentation. Some of the bigger presentations that weren't that long could have all been memorized. But I think there was a teleprompter there in any case.
Sky?
I was curious about a teleprompter when the gentleman was standing out in the desert on the rocks. I'm thinking, I don't know if there was a teleprompter or an IFB in his head or he'd memorized it. But this technique has been around for quite a while when you have multiple cameras on an interview with somebody that is not a performer. And so the producer will choose this as a way of creating energy and interest in something, in a person that is not a full-time engaged with the camera person. And so this is a very common technique in multi-camera shoots.
Alex.
I think the unfortunate thing is that the teleprompters are the least effective with people who don't have a lot of practice because they come up, there's a little bit of a cardboard thing. When people have done a lot of teleprompting, if you watch the nightly news or you watch something like that, and you have people who are trained hosts, they can just sound like they're just talking, and it sounds good and it works. And there's no way that they could ever put that information, especially live news or other things, there's no way they'd be able to put that information together and speak it out in a effective way without a teleprompter. And they're very, very good at it. And it feels very natural, and they're very trained and practiced and everything else. When you put it in front of someone who's never done it before, it can be painful for everybody involved. So it's really hard. It's hard for them to memorize it all if they're not trained either. So you kind of you don't have a lot of other options. I will say that, again, there are some companies that will push everybody to memorize it, and then they will just see notes on the teleprompter. They know where to go, like do this thing, then this thing, then this thing. So they're only getting a line that just reminds them of where to go. But they spend, weeks working on that to make sure that it works. And I think that it would help Apple to spend more time, having them work on it. It's the other thing that you see with the teleprompter is that a lot of times their eyes. You see this also when people are in super sources on the news, is they're not really looking at anybody. And because of that, there's like this dead stare that occurs that goes away when you give someone to look at and to tell them the story. And Errol Morris kind of pushed this forward. He didn't invent it. We always talk about that. But he did push it, made it the Interrotron process. You get a much better performance, in my opinion.
There is also the possibility of an ear prompter. I've used those a couple of times. I had to do a long thing for Motorola once talking about opto-pressure sensors. So they decided to do it at the Hoover Dam, and I had to crawl all over the dam inside and outside while delivering lines. That was my crutch, was to record it on a small recorder in my pocket and just feed it to my own ear. And then I could keep accurate because there was a lot of details that had to be spoken exactly as they wanted. That's another technique. So there are more than that. So we've actually got a lot of questions to go, and we're rolling here to 20 minutes. So we're going to up the pace a little bit. And next question, please.
David Brady, New York, New York. Screening room experience. The ask is for high-res screening in Zoom. Is it better to use a second camera input for advanced sharing or to have a dedicated room device for direct contact sharing via that room's primary camera path?
Guy Cochran's going to help us here.
Yeah, good question. That advanced sharing is mainly meant for a whiteboard. So if you're looking at something that's more like a school where you have a second camera that's somebody's doing math, it could do a high resolution but at a low frame rate. So I wouldn't go that path because you could get a bigger looking image, even a massive image, but it'll just be really chunky, like even down to 1 frame a second. So it would be correct to use the traditional path. And of course, if you're only using a regular account, you're going to get 360p, request 720 from Zoom and with a support ticket, and you can get 720. And if you have a business account, you can get all the way up to 1080. So that would be the best way to go.
Excellent. Alex, you got about a minute.
Yeah, there is a optimized for video in there, and it will improve the frame rate, but it's not as good as just having the input as Guy was talking about. It's so there is something there that makes it better, but not as good as the straight direct.
Excellent. Next question, please.
Rizal Hariati in Tempe, Arizona. I would like to record a chalk talk using an Insta360 Link PTZ webcam. I need to move the webcam from my office to the classroom in a different part of my campus. What is the best way to transport the Insta360 Link webcam?
And Alex is going to help us here.
Kind of amazed they haven't built a kit. I am the best way to do it is take it in the box that it came in. I am building a kit for it. I'll publish the stuff as I work on it. I had a bad curing over the last weekend. I thought I'd have it all figured out, but I decided I wanted to make a cast, and the cast didn't work. So I'm going to do it again this weekend, and we'll make that cast. I'll put up the raw model data that I created with it, and then I'll also any model that I make to print. I'm going to do a 3D print of it for it. I'll post that as well. I'll put it on something Sketchfab or whatever, but I'll make it available so people can use it if they want.
Courtney, you got a minute?
If you're going to do this repeatedly, I'd go with something like a Pelican case. They make some small cases like this that are waterproof, and just cut the foam out to accommodate it, stick it in there with its cable, and you should be good to go. And it should be able to transport it safely and even in a rainstorm.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
it's just because of the servo motors on that particular webcam. You can't just throw it in a bag because it could damage the servo motors there in that gimbal.
Yeah, from seeing Alex's version of it, it looks like it's a little bit delicate, and I think all this about keeping it safe is well designed. Let's move to the next question.
VPN Abraham in Pune, India. Would the M1 Mac Mini support 2 of the BlackMagic Ultra Studio Monitor 3Gs? Trying to get 4 video outputs total without the Decklink Duo. Decklink Duo with a chassis is hard to source, and prices are inflated here in India.
And Alex is going to weigh in on this.
Should work fine. Yeah, it should. I mean, we've plugged we've plugged definitely 2 of the actual Duos in different Sonnet boxes to the M1 Mini. And even, and we've done up to, I think, 3 different ones to the Studio. So but with the Mini, you should be able to put 2 in. It should be no problem.
Next question.
From Alex Buckland in North UK. Anyone else noticed a change in the taste of some of Apple's messaging in this keynote? For example, they added a cutesy style to the crash detection feature card on the slides that just felt wrong to me.
And Sky.
Well, again, you're talking about marketing, and it's going to change every time every month, or at least every quarter. Consequently, I was acknowledging the use of the buildings, but when you have a really cool building like that, and I'm seeing a lot of other organizations, big organizations that have really cool big buildings as architecture, they're using them as backdrops. But Alex mentioned that we're going to be deconstructing the run of show, and I'm very fascinated in that story. But as far as style and taste, yeah, it's always going to be different. Cutesy, I think we'll look forward to talking about that in the future.
There's so much information in those. And I was kind of surprised at a couple of things. First of all, how much time they spent on the watch up front. And I understand that. I think with all the medical capacities of the watch, and I think they really want to lean into that. It's something they do better than anybody else on the planet right now, this idea of a wrist unit that is connected to everything that you do. And their push towards more and more health features. I was really very encouraged to see all the women's health stuff that they really front-loaded in that and talked about at great length. I think that was a nice move for them. And I just think when I look back at the amount of time they spent on the different things, they spent a ton on the watch, some time on the AirPod Pros in the middle, and then close with the iPhone things. But they really did front load. I think how they front load these demos kind of tells you where their heart is in terms of their R&D and where they're going. They understand that the big cash cow of iPhones is a big thing, but they're also really leaning into this new technology, and I found it really pretty interesting. Let's move on.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Insta360 X3 was just announced with a 5.7K 360 video with Active HDR versus the One RS 1-inch 360 edition, which has 6K 360-degree video and a 1-inch sensor. Is the X3 good enough for mixing in with production uses?
No one's raised their hand on this one, and I don't know much about here we go. Alex is weighing in, and so is Courtney. Alex, take it away.
It depends on what you consider production uses. Would I put it into a TV production or a high-end live stream? Probably not. But if I was doing, some more adventure stuff and some basic YouTube outputs, it definitely has a lot of uses. Its ability to stabilize from a 360 and output a 1080p is pretty cool.
Courtney.
Yeah, what Alex said, that it's okay as far as putting it in a network broadcast or something, used minimally just for an effect. Its whole gag is taking a 360-degree view, which is a very distorted view lens, and flattening it out to give you a viewport within that 360-degree field of vision. And so you're constantly taking just a small portion of that sensor and doing a lot of math on it to correct for the barrel distortion that happens with that super wide-angle lens. And so all that distortion, all that computation that's going on, creates a bit of, distortion and softening of the image itself. So not great. And it never will be great because it's a lot of computational math that's going on to flatten it out.
Fair enough. Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego, California. Please discuss the improvements in the new iPhone 14 camera system unveiled yesterday.
And Alex is going to start us off.
Some of the stabilization looks pretty cool. The biggest update to it is the binning. So basically, it's a 48 megapixel camera or sensor that then, for the most part, now you can output, it looks like from what I saw there, you can output the raw sensor data, or you can output a raw, which will give you a 48 megapixel image. But what it does to deliver a 12 megapixel image back to you is it takes 4 pixels for every pixel and creates a new pixel that makes that work. And they claim that it will have twice the low light performance. It possibly could have a lot less grain all around and probably a lot more detail for a 12 megapixel image. So it'll be really interesting to see, what happens there. Of course, I'm buying it. So as soon as we get it, we'll test it against the 13. And there's also a longer telephoto now 3x instead of 2x, and a couple of changes to the lenses. But those seem to be what I saw as the major upgrades to the Pro camera.
Sky.
And I did see, I got an announcement from Moment that they were already addressing the new camera with their lenses and stuff that they can add on the outside. But I did hear that there is now a 4th lens or something like that in the 14, which I have the 13 Pro, and the capacity, of course, is awesome. The conversation I was having with my DP friend was how odd it felt to have this little tiny camera on top of this big giant gimbal on the set, but it's happening, and it is odd now that I'm thinking about making sure my camera can make a phone call.
It's a new world out there. Let's move on. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico City, Mexico. What is your impression of the yesterday's Apple keynote?
And Alex is going to give us starts.
Overall, I thought it was pretty good. I did like the fact that they didn't slow it down. I think maybe they have decided not to do that, which would be great. I guess there was a live announcement before the keynote started, but then after that, it was just a movie, and I just think it moves a lot faster. I think that if they ever went back to trying to do something on stage, they'd very quickly realize how slow a stage performance is, and they probably would go back to what they're doing now, and maybe they've already made that decision. I think it's a much higher quality viewing experience, by having it tied together. I love the transitions. I think that as someone who's had to build a lot of call outs, like, taking something technical and exploding it out and then telling people what things are, Apple is the best at it. Like, I just love watching it. Every time they're about to blow the watch open or expand something out, it's just the whole design. As someone who's had to do a bunch of those, I just take notes. I'm like, oh, I see what they did there. It's really nice. And so so they do that really well.
Courtney?
I pretty much liked it. I enjoyed it. I think they did cut a lot of although it was fairly long for presenting very little new, there were, some improvements in the cameras, some improvements in the watch. It's thicker, fatter, lasts longer, and now goes underwater. So they spent the most time, I think, on the watch more than anything else. So a lot of those personal use anecdotes that they showed, I think, got a little too long. And I would like to have seen them just go over the changes and accentuated the new specs and what's new and exciting about the watches. And same thing with the phones. I did like the production of where they took them out of the field, if they were in the field, or maybe they were just on a green screen stage. I don't know. The giant Fortress of Solitude set, I think, is a little too much. I think they've been looking at too many video games. So I think they could tone that down a bit with the giant screen and looks like Batman's underground garage. Doesn't it?
It was a cool looking garage, though. But I understand your point. Let's move on.
David Brady, New York, New York. Home automation. I recently set up a Homebridge server on the Raspberry Pi I use for Pi-hole. Now looking to automate my roller shades. Has anyone seen or used Tilt? Looks to be a winner without the Lutron money.
And Courtney is in here, if I can. There we go.
Nigel will be the guy to ask this. Come back in a day when he's here. Automated roller shades. that's the only exercise I get is getting up to pull down the shade. So it gets me out of the couch. So if I had an automated, I think I would be stuck in this chair forever.
I know that feeling. It's like you get too many buttons you push to do things, and you find yourself, you've been in your chair for like a day and have never gotten out of it. So I resonate with that. Let's move on to the next question.
All right, I've got a question here. I noticed that more people are posting their privacy notice on Facebook saying that they don't give permission to use their photos or likeness on Facebook. Is this legal?
And we have John Wallace to start, then Mitchell.
It's legal for them to post it. Is it enforceable? No.
And Mitchell Hill.
I think when you sign the terms of service with Facebook, you give them the permission. So it's already been a done deal. So just posting a notice that you can't use my picture isn't going to cut it. The next best thing you can do is cancel the subscription to Facebook, delete the application and get rid of all that, and you might be okay then.
And finally, Alex.
Technically, Facebook wouldn't work if they couldn't move your images around. They couldn't put it in the feed. Like that's the issue. Like they couldn't put it in the feed if they didn't have the permission to use your image. So yeah, it doesn't mean anything.
Okay, next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego, California. Does the Insta360 Link have higher quality than the Brio? Which camera do you send out in your kits for video events?
And Alex.
The Link is higher quality, but I don't think I would send it out just yet because it's delicate, and I don't know if a civilian wouldn't break it. So it's mostly that if I had somebody to put it up for them, I would absolutely use the Link. If I'm going to send it out to a random person to put it on, I'll send the Brio.
And next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico City, Mexico. I was surprised that Apple Keynote was streamed in surround to Safari on Mac, but not any other browsers.
And Alex.
This is because it is I don't know how to say this in a nice way. As soon as you get out of the Apple ecosystem, surround is incredibly difficult. And it's because there just hasn't been an investment in the browsers by the people who are making the browsers, the operating systems, everything else. Android, Windows is a dumpster fire for surround. As someone who's had to stream to those platforms, I'm just bitter and angry about the whole thing. And so with Apple, you just turn it on and you say, this is what I want to do, and it all works. it just works because they've been doing surround and vision for the last 5 years, and so it's much, much simpler to do it on a Mac platform. So you basically have to just turn all that stuff off, because it's just what happens is if you start sending that out to the system, you're going to end up in things can get caught. I talked about the manifest before. They can get confused, and actually put out the wrong things. I will say that Chrome was getting in the manifest, an option for Atmos. So the manifest for Chrome was delivered to Chrome as Atmos. So it might be possible for it to do it, but it doesn't seem like it. If you didn't hear it, it just wasn't picking it up. But yeah, it's the other platforms and other browsers are a solid 2 or 3 years behind Apple when it comes to surround.
And I'm sure it makes a difference that Apple controls Keynote and Safari and everything.
No, what makes a difference is that they paid for it. Apple paid Dolby so they could put it all in, and they just licensed it, and everyone else was too cheap. That's the bottom line.
Okay. So that makes sense. Next question.
Don Modine in Manchester, Connecticut. How processed was the audio during the Apple event? The footage on the Rock sounded crystal clear, almost like it was in a controlled soundstage. What tricks were they using?
Mitch, you have thoughts?
Well, they've got lots of money, and they can hire the very best Hollywood has to offer to shoot it. So they could bring in a crew like Courtney to do their audio for them. And if they don't like the audio that they recorded, they have the money to loop it after the fact.
And Courtney.
And they have the ability to shoot it on a green screen stage with a controlled environment. The other thing, even if they did shoot it outside on the Rock, they could do something which we do in production these days, is go ahead and mic it with a boom microphone fairly close. Just it's in the frame in that wide shot, and then you just do a a pass without the boom in there, and they composite, they paint it out. So they paint out the boom later. Since it's not a live shot, it's in post-production, you have the ability to do that. So it's easy enough to use visual effects to paint out a high-quality microphone and get it fairly close to the talent to get a really good, clean sounding sound, even if you're outdoors. You know, of course, if you're in that green screen studio and you're just compositing it, it's even easier.
Alex?
We'll cover this when we dig into the keynote. I think that very little of it was actually green screened, and the reason I say that is because I looked at things that I knew were green screened, and they didn't have very much hair detail. Which means if they didn't do it well there, they would have. Why did we suddenly see all the hair detail in other places? So I think we can look at hair detail and very quickly know which one was green screen and which one wasn't. If you see the underground ones, you'll see green screen or obviously green screen, and they don't have the hair detail, which means that that it's going to be the same people. They didn't just send those ones out to the wrong house. So anyway, I think that I think the ones where we see high hair detail were probably there's probably a practical shoot, and the ones that are obviously CG definitely had the smoother edges that we had discussed earlier. The way I would record that is just with something that's in their pocket recording, or on their body with a lav, inside. A lot of times that's the way we handle a lot of those kinds of things, or this crazy thing called ADR. So they actually just say it again over top of their voice, and that's about 80% of what you see on TV and film in the United States is a result of ADR.
Next question.
Next question from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. What are some beginner's tips for learning to watch an event for the production value, i.e. Apple's event or live sports?
And Alex.
The big thing is to download them. So you use something like Downy or other things like that. You download the image so that you can go through it. The things that pop out for you is to really look at things. Oh, that looks really cool, and then play through it slowly and look at it and figure out what's actually happening there. The best way to do it is to reproduce it. So if you see a graphic that you like, try it. See what it takes to put it together. You'll find that even the simplest transition might take days for you to put together, and it gives you a new respect for what they're doing because, but you'll learn a lot. If you really try to do it, it's how I got into the business. Was I just grabbed a bunch of stuff on a VHS tape, played it over and over again, and reproduced it literally as close to frame for frame as I could, so that I could, that's how I built my demo reel. My first little demo reel, the only one I ever made, but I just changed the logos on it, and that was it. And it was a great learning experience. It took me about 6 months to do about 45 seconds.
Sky.
Well, Alex talked about what you liked. And that was kind of what I'm bringing to this conversation is just if you're not able to record something, just keep a notepad. And what is it that you liked? Use your emotions to understand that people are doing a rise and fall in the event, because if it's all fireworks all the time, you're exhausted in about 3 minutes. And so consequently, there is a pace of energy, light, contrast, music, all of your sensory experiences. And then to Alex's point, if you want to recreate it and learn how to do it yourself, now you're starting to understand what emotionally you're doing to your audience because you've been moved yourself.
Courtney, you have a quick comment?
Yeah, it ties into kind of what Alex said, is to record it, or, I have a TiVo and all my live sports, I can instantly go back. It's always recording, and I can instantly go back and analyze something frame by frame because it's recording in MPEG 2, and it keeps each individual frame. With streaming, most of it's MPEG 4 or HEVC. And so going back and being able to rock back and forth, go forward and backward one frame at a time is really not possible in that compression format if you're streaming, unless you do, like Alex said, download it and transcode it into something that is an interframe codec. So that you can actually look at the frames by frames. If you want to see individual things within the frame, that may be your only way of doing that.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was trying to click on something. It wasn't clicking. Let's go on to the next question.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington, and right here on the panel. Next year, can we, at office hours, do a live Burning Man event?
If we thought it was messy out there on the playa for the office hours rocket launch, that would be a whole new level of Alex, what do you think?
110 degrees.
Sky, if you're willing to bring the cameras, and they're your cameras, I'm 100% behind it. But I've seen the pictures there, and I would never take my camera to Burning Man. I would have to have some cameras that I knew that I was never going to use again.
No, I was so pitiful for Noah Sargent out there. We were doing everything we could to keep those covered. But yeah,
I think that I would love to now with I think we're going to see a lot of live streaming. I think it's going to, I don't know if it's going to be good or bad for Burning Man, but I think that as the Starlink takes off, you're going to see tons and tons and tons of live streaming coming out of there.
It's an interesting event, and you don't want to go glamping there. You kind of look down on. You really want to get into the process, and
I would glamp.
A little messy.
I would absolutely glamp. Like there's no way that I would go there in a tent. Oh yeah. If we ever go, if I ever show up, we're going to have a giant motorhome, and it's going to have all the amenities and a lot of great air conditioning. That's all I'm saying.
People will come by on bicycles wearing a loincloth and all dirty, and they'll scowl at you.
That's the way I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
I hear you. All right, next question.
Ryan Rademan in Chicago, Illinois. What are your thoughts on yesterday's iPhone and AirPods announcement?
Alex?
The iPhone I'm excited about. I mean, just anything, as long as they make a significant move in the camera, I'm in. Like, I'm just kind of like, I just like that. I mean, I've gotten to the point now where 99% of my images are shot with my phone. And so I just look at it like buying another lens. And so, which is about the same cost as the phone. And so I think that the 13 brought me more joy when it comes to taking pictures with the macro and the slow motion and the quality and taking pictures of my kids. It's why main reason I'm upgrading is so that my wife, who has like an iPhone 8 or something, can be upgraded to 13 so that I have, and so it's a little easier for me, but I think that's good. The AirPods, I was like, we'll see. I think that it looks incremental. I'll probably skip it. But maybe I might break down and buy it, but, and I already ordered the watch, the outdoor one. So
we're going to run a little bit long here on this because we got a couple more good questions. Next.
Svetlana in Belarus, Minsk. Yesterday's uncatched question on applying AI. How far would you go applying AI in social, medical, law-related spheres and accordingly decision-making concerning ethical sides?
And Alex.
I think the key is to try to, we won't do this, but the key is to keep the humans involved, in the decision process, that the AI is handing humans data, sorting through that data for them. And so for instance, one of the things we did in a previous version of Makana is if you were getting a high volume, the AI would show us, I think all these images, I think all of these questions are the same. Are they? And which one should be the representative one? So because when you're getting like 1,000 questions an hour, you would need to do something with them. And so we group them. And so, but we have basically a human. It's not the computer making the decision. It's the computer is serving up, I think that these are something that we should deal with. And the human then deals with them and sends them out. It still sped things up. There's no way a human could do what we were doing, but it was far higher quality than anything the AI was going to do on its own.
Courtney?
And that's the point I was going to make, a winnowing process where it's going through and sorting through and prioritizing the ones that the real human should look at first. The danger in that is if you use it as a filter and it filters out something that's important because it interpreted a word wrong or something and didn't get it right in the context, is probably very dangerous, especially in the worlds of legal prep and so on, So I think it has to be used judiciously, and I don't know if supporting it in court cases is going to be upheld, because people could contest if the AI filtered out an important piece of evidence or reinterpreted a piece of evidence if a human would interpret it differently than the computer.
And John Preto.
If you watch Lex Friedman's YouTube channel, they talk specifically about this. It's all about AI. I can tell you specifically in radiology, my dad and brother are both radiologists. They're doing exactly what Alex just articulated. So the AI is reading the radiographs and making the recommendation to the radiologist, and the radiologist makes the decision.
Yeah, I can see all that. There are so many areas where this is going to be a huge boon, and it's really going to help. And those kind of healthcare things, I do worry a little bit because let's face it, as we go by, the thing that we turn and stare at the most is the accident we're passing. And so I hope that we don't get people who are doing AI algorithms that just keep saying, whatever you look at is the most important thing, feed them more of that. Because if you make it simplistic like that and you don't have somebody on the back end making value judgments, it can get real ugly real fast. But who knows? It's a brave new world, and that's what we're heading for. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, which means it's time to turn over to our second hour topic. Today, we are going to be talking about video mastering, encoding of things like that. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is that it's an area that I work in a good little bit. I have to do a lot of deliveries, and I've seen so much change over the last maybe 6 or 7 years. I came out of the tape era where things were so simple. You knew exactly what videotape format all the stations wanted, and it came out of some tape duplication house, but it was all real easy on the back end. The environment we live in now is totally different. And it starts on the beginning end with the cameras that are shooting our content. They have so many different settings and possibilities and encodings. And then you're trying to get that to different delivery destinations. And while broadcast is fading, it's still out there and they have specifications, but you also have all these over-the-top services and digital delivery into websites and things like that. And they may or may not want the same files. In fact, I have seen a good little bit. I have a real quick presentation. I'm just going to zip through to kind of outline what this is looking like to me in my practice. Let's see if this gets taken. Yeah. So basically, what I'm talking about here is there's 3 things that I find I need to know to master files out there. And the first one is what is coming into me from whoever's producing this thing. And it's very variable. And I have to think about it in terms of what's the codec, what's the bit rate, what's the raster size, the audio track configurations coming in, audio sample rates and things like that. And if I don't know that about the original file delivered to me, it's really hard for me to turn that into things that are compatible with the delivery destinations. I tend to use a tool called Media Info, which is great. It's free. It's out there. It's open source. You can just drag a file on it and it'll give you a report like this that tells you all the little details about what was in that file in terms of sample rate and everything else. The second thing I really need to know is what is my target? Am I going to direct delivery to something? Do I need to mezzanine encode something or transcode it to get it out on the back end? And all those little fake cards up there indicate that I might have a lot of different targets for the thing that came in. And so what I spend most of my time doing is trying to devise a workflow because I like to do this myself. It's not important or required to do this yourself, but you've got so many of these new things. I mean, content distribution places like Vimeo and YouTube and Hightail, and these are kind of the consumer formats. You've got content distribution networks that are bigger, Cloudflare, Akamai, Microsoft Azure. You've got over-the-top stuff, Roku, Apple TV Plus, Amazon Fire TV. You also have, and these are real interesting if you don't do a lot of this, these services that file distribution, and they'll take care of all this transcoding and getting it right for you. Extreme Reach and Centaur are 2 of the biggest ones in this area. And they're great because you upload a good master to them and they will target all sorts of delivery things. The only thing is they're expensive. And so you end up paying a lot to that middleman, and you may not want to do that, which puts you into kind of the do-it-yourself thing. You can save a lot of money. I tend to do this mostly, and I work with a lot of media buyers who are saying, here are the stations or the websites or the people that you have to deliver to, and then it's up to me to figure out how to take care of their distribution requirements. And so I might be doing a media buy. I might be producing for an NBC station, CBS, all the rest of these, YouTube, Facebook Live, and I have to go through this process and figure this all out. And the biggest problem that I've run into recently is that there are no humans left in the process. This is now 100% automated on the back end. It's really pretty scary. It's all machines. I deliver a lot of files into the cloud, and I don't know why that's not refreshing, but it's not on what I'm seeing on playback. There are just no people left in the system. So I'm talking to people at stations, but they don't really know what they're doing. They're literally, let me come out of that. They're literally just attempting to get this done without any idea. And I constantly get, you submitted a file and the computer is telling me it's not going to work for some reason. And I have to go back in and deconstruct what it is that's failing. And in most of the cases, when I get into trouble with that, it's because I didn't read closely enough that original file and to find out that, oh, when they shot it at 24 frames a second. I had to work in 29.97 because most of this is going to broadcast. And the file anomalies happen during the transcoding of those two things. So that's the problem that I'm facing constantly. And it's just getting more and more complicated. So let's get out of the presentation for a little bit and go directly to question and answer and see what everybody else's problems are. And I've got a few more things here on the back end to kind of help you maybe figure out some of these things. First question, Mitch.
From Frojan Banrel in San Diego, California. 4K 60 frames per second videos from iPhone 13 Pro Max. What is best available format to deliver to Facebook?
Whatever Facebook asks for. Alex, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't done it to Facebook recently, but in the past, we've simply used H.264 at a high resolution. Now, some people, I believe that you can upload, I know to YouTube, you can upload everything up to, ProRes to put it up there. But usually I don't do that. And the reason for that isn't that I actually want to do the first pass of compression myself by pushing the color, the infinite colors into specific boxes. It gives me more control over what's actually going to happen, because when you put up, you think that a ProRes file will look better when you upload it to one of these online services, but they have kind of a middle of the road, what's good for a kind of everything kind of a compression scheme. And they oftentimes, it's a little muddy compared to if you actually do your own compression to H.264, you're basically creating the quantization that's necessary to push it into the blocks. It tends to stay that way. It's whatever you upload tends to be more consistent than if you let it do it from a higher res file. So I would do H.264.
Another thing is that often these services do what Vimeo is really good at, which is taking your master, whatever you upload, and then transcoding it into a variety of mezzanine formats that look at what people are asking for, what device they're on, and feed them the file for the device they're on. Now, normally these big services do a really good job of that transcoding in the middle. And so I try to upload the biggest, most robust file that they will accept.
But what I'm saying is I start with an H.264. I never put up at a ProRes file. I let it transcode from the H.264 because I have more. I will have more control over the quality than if you put up a ProRes file for them to do it. Because as they build that transcode, they're going to base it. They're going to make they often make the decisions badly. Or not as good as what would happen if I can sit there and hand crank an H.264 and upload it. It's good. They are going to build those transcodes, and those transcodes will look better from an H.264, a high quality H.264 than a ProRes file.
Fair enough. I don't experience that often in Vimeo, but that may be absolutely accurate.
Vimeo, by the way, Vimeo is a much higher quality. That's a different thing.
Yeah, we tend to use that as our content distribution network because it's got a great back end, and it's got the public facing piece of this that they've managed to put together is incredibly embeddable, which a lot of my particularly over the top customers, what they want to do is they want something where they can control the file version, because there's a lot of version changing now. Somebody had to come in and make a change on a spot or a change on a video, and they want it up as quickly as possible. The advantage of Vimeo for me is that I send up a revised master at the same original encoding, and everything on every website that's plumbed into that as their source file changes automatically as well. So that saves a ton of time on the back end.
Hey, Bill, I'm gonna take over just for a second and let you drop out and come back in. Maybe restart your computer or something.
Okay. Did something get stuck?
You're a couple seconds off out of sync. So we'll just drop back out, and we'll hand it back to you when you get back.
Sure, no problem.
Next question.
Sure. Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas has a question. How does mastering differ for TVs, movies, and documentaries?
Yeah, so the it is very different to go to those. What you're doing is you're, for TV typically, and it's melded together a little bit, because when you talk about TV, you're talking about broadcast, as opposed to the streaming networks are very similar in some ways into what's actually happening there. Now, TV is typically a 709 delivery, so it's just standard dynamic range. Not always, but pretty frequently it's a 709, as opposed to documentaries and film, where oftentimes there's going to be a 709 version that's going to be made available, but they're also doing HDR versions. And oftentimes TV does a very limited amount of surround. That's starting to become more prevalent, but when you get into the documentaries and film, there are almost always some surround format that's being included in the mastering. So you'll see an Atmos, an Atmos or at least 5.1 is something that typically will happen in those audio files. So those things are there, and typically it's some version of HDR is made available to that mastering. Additionally, if you're sending it out for a theatrical release, you'll need to build what's called a DCP. So basically you have to, and that's a whole second hour, so I won't get into too much of that. But the DCPs are how things get played out, in a film format. And those oftentimes you're literally going in and exporting frame sequences, out. For things that are going out into streams, the one thing that does happen is the kind of encoding that happens for a stream that you see, like a major feature film that goes to HBO Max or goes to Disney Plus or Apple Plus, that takes days. Like, it's not like you throw it into a compressor and it comes out the other end. It does many passes of analyzing the footage and then very carefully trying to get the best quality out of it. And it takes a lot of time for it to really get everything out of that image that it can for compression. And so typically, I think that a lot of feature films take 2 or 3 days of some very powerful processors to analyze the footage and export it properly. Go ahead, Sky.
We would use different companies there in Burbank for mastering the DCPs, because you have different platforms that you're sending it to. So it's going to look different on a 40-foot screen versus what it's going to be coming across on a projected monitor. So these are different requests from the distributor of where do they see they're going to be sending this film. And so consequently, TV has one spec and movies have a different spec. Documentaries probably would fit into that, again, depending on where you're delivering it to. So yeah, know who your delivery is, and also make friends with Deluxe.
And as Bill said, the biggest thing is following the instructions. Like there's usually a document, and if you're the one getting it, you want to make detailed instructions of exactly what you want. How many channels do you want? What order are those channels? How is it set up? How's it all structured? What is the encoding process that you want to use? Those are all things that are important to the puzzle, and you really have to read and reread those, because a lot of times they'll just get. If it's a big house or it's something, they'll just kick it back. They'll be like, we can't do this. Or you talk to them and say, I can't provide you this, but can we provide that? Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Bill is exactly right, especially with the automated systems that they print their specifications and you do your very darndest to match them, and it still kicks it back at you. And most of them are not verbose enough to tell you exactly what you screwed up. So now you're sitting there scratching your head trying to figure out, well, what do I need to change? Is the audio the wrong codec, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a nature of the beast. Having a house do it for you, wow, wouldn't that be nice? I just don't have the money to do it.
Well, and if you get good at it, you can be the house. People send it to us, send it out. How you doing, Bill?
I think I'm back in. Hopefully I'm not too delayed. What does it look like from your side? Should I say Peter Piper?
You're good.
It's close. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Close. Excellent. So I don't know what you guys talked about while I was gone, but let me
We just finished the question that's there. So if you jump to Tommy's question, you'll be right on.
All right. Next question.
From Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. Is audio a part of video mastering, or is it a completely different operation?
Well, they want audio that works for the system as well. And often the audio specifications are combined with the video that you'll get in the manifest from what the end content distribution process party is looking for. But Mitch? take off.
Yeah, usually when you're doing the encoding, whether you're using compressor or I use Adobe Media Encoder, you can break it down. You can break down the codec, the type of audio file it is, many of the details associated with the streaming capability of that. So it's there. You can do it, but you do it at the same time that you do the video compression.
Sky?
You heard me mention earlier, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I come from the old days when each of these different divisions or departments had their own person and equipment and technology and experience. Consequently, I still send out my audio to an audio engineer that does the balancing and the mixing, and then he sends me back a mixed pair that will go into my final delivery.
And Alex?
Yeah, typically the compression and the delivery might be together. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the client might even ask for the Pro Tools session that was used to create the file, so that if they need to make any adjustments, they can. But as Mickey points out, as far as mastering goes, usually it's done separately. It's not usually done in the same. Even though that you have an app like Resolve that has a lot of things together, most mastering, I would say, a solid 95% of mastering is done in Pro Tools. So it's how do you get in and out of Pro Tools and how do you sync with Pro Tools? So you'll have what's called a two-pop that is going to have, you'll hear this beep at the beginning, beep at the end, sometimes a couple beeps for calibration. And what that does is it tells you that everything's still lined the way up, that your audio track is lined up with your video track, because the audio was delivered out to the to someone like Mickey, who will then clean everything up. Mickey actually does most of the ones that I do. So that is so Mickey will, or somebody will clean it up and do all the post on it and then send it back to you. The key is you have to be very, very careful that when you send it out like that you're not changing anything in video in time that would need to be synced. So once you send it out for post, you really have to have picture lock, or at least picture lock on the people talking or anything that's synced to sound. You could still throw graphics over top of something, but you have to be very, very, very careful after you do that not to move that out. And as Mickey said, AAFs, XML, and if you have it, EDLs are used to move media locked to the time frame in and out of most DAWs.
And this is all useful inside the production process as you're getting your things ready. But these days, they want first frame of content to last frame of content. None of this stuff gets sent off to the distribution method. And I'm usually setting my audio up for one of two standards. Either they want -12, and broadcast still often wants -12 LUFS with peaks controlled. The web tends to be louder, and so -16 is my typical delivery target for that. But all this, the slates stuff, all in the mezzanine process, absolutely. But once it gets to a mastering file, nobody wants to deal with anything other than the runnable spot, because they're all automated and coming out of automated systems.
And I do think that, while I don't think that Resolve is there yet, if they keep going down the path that they're going, I think that they have a potential for probably not the highest end solution, at least in the near future. But there's a lot of productions that would benefit from doing everything in Resolve. So having the Fairlight that's all there, that is connected to all the footage, that's all in one place. And when you see the cloud that they've built, you could have people going in and out of it. I think that it's very difficult to compete with Pro Tools in this area, especially in established markets that are already doing it. But as we keep on looking at more complex productions that are going out to the web, I do think that potentially Resolve could get more of that business.
Let's take the next question before I do a little more of the exposition. Go ahead.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. He asks, what is the difference between mixing and mastering?
And Sky.
Well, there are many people here, and on Tuesday mornings, you'll hear a lot of great audio. And I'm going to, and we've also talked about color and how that happens. But I think the metaphor that immediately comes to me is, if you're making a cake, you would mix all of your ingredients into something, and then the presentation is your mastering. You're delivering something. So that's the simplistic version of it. But I know we're going to go technical and deep on moving on.
Courtney.
Well, I consider it, and it's changed considerably when we transitioned from analog to digital. In analog, you were actually re-recording, and so you had to have somebody there making judgments as they created that master to make sure that the levels were correct. Mixing is usually a creative position that adjusts the volumes of the various tracks, various elements within each track, and mastering is putting those tracks in containers that are compatible with their distribution output. So you're usually not making any kind of mixing decisions in mastering. You're just containerizing and making sure that all of the tracks fall within the legal limits of the volumes and the restraints of the distribution media. So you might be doing just a little adjustment of level to keep it within the legal limits, but you're not making any creative decisions as far as the balance goes, I think.
Yeah, and there's a little difference between certain kinds of content. Movies want a lot of dynamic range. They want, the quiet things to be quieter, the louder things to be louder, the explosions to be super loud. When you're talking about broadcast, particularly in commercials and other for money pieces, they tend to want their spots to stand out. So it's pretty normal for me to produce a spot where the mix is the difference between the maybe voiceover and the background music track and sound effects and things like that. So all of them are being mixed so that the relative levels are the same. But once that master is made, or in the process of making the master, most often my clients want that entire mix to be maxed for wherever it's going, because hearing the narration, hearing the announcer for the spot is the most critical thing. And if that level is too low compared to everything else in broadcast, or if they put it in their computer and they play it and it's way too quiet and people can't hear the spot, I'll get an immediate note back and not good. Let's do it again. So next question.
And it's coming from me. Do you use bars and tone on your digital files?
Sky?
Short answer is no. But historically, Bill, you talk about only having a few choices of how to deliver when you were doing tape. You must have lived in a magic land, because when I was delivering, there was never the same spec twice. And the bars and tone would be that system by which they could check the audio level. Okay, you got good. And then the different colors, and they're good. And so you're setting a specification. But I was always, some people wanted 5994. Some people wanted, especially when we converted from SD to HD. So yeah, I don't remember it as easily as you do.
Well, yeah, but all I'm saying is the targets were known and fixed. NTSC standards, broadcast standards, and everybody followed them. That's what I'm saying has gone out the window.
And the QC check was always a human, but when it started getting automated, I think they were getting paid by the mark, and that's when we understood that the delivery of something could be called an artistic choice, and you could get around some of the little glitches and things that. Yeah, that's artistic.
Alex.
Almost everything we deliver has bars and tone. So it's the point of truth. This is the color that we're sending you. This is what we consider correct color. This is what we consider correct level. If you don't send that out, then no one knows exactly where you were on it. And so usually it's a pretty important piece of a delivery file.
I will agree with you. It's critical to keep the quality up to the last thing, but in the
it's not the quality.
Stage,
it's the when you put it out for play out, you might cut those off, but when you
they're
deliver
always cut off.
There's always a version that has them because you have to you're telling broadcast typically this is what we consider a single point of truth. Of this is what it is. And so it's important to use standards. The other thing that you get into is people get creative about their bars and tone, and then that upsets broadcasters a lot. Like when you get creative, they want exactly what they're looking at. They want you to use the standard.
Mitch, real quick, and I'll have a last thought.
Yeah, it's not a animation sequence. It's a bars and tones, and we use them. Because we need to set a reference level, and we need to show what the color references are and what we're using to calibrate everything to. In the old days, it was a little different that you had to have a certain length of bars and tones and then some dead air, and then the stuff started. But things were different back then because I think a lot of times they were punching the record on the record deck based on when the bar stopped.
Yeah, and I think what we're getting into the weeds here is it's the difference between production, where I 100% agree, bars and tone, everything to spec is critical, mission critical. Then you get to delivery, and all the rules have changed, and they've changed radically. Let me see if I can pop up that screen that I was looking for originally. Is that going to take it? No, of course it's not, and it probably froze me, and that's going to be a mess. Let me see if I can go back to live. Looks like I'm not going to be able to play these out. So I'll just give you some of the content verbally. The thing is, no humans are involved in this anymore. At the point of delivery to the stations, it's really hard to find humans there. You get approvals and declines via email. There's nobody you can call, so it's really a difficult work. You're usually working with somebody who's in sales at a company like Hulu or any other of the distribution targets that it'll go to. Occasionally, if you really work hard, you can get to a supervisor who's probably sitting in New York and get a little extra information, but even that is difficult to do these days. There are also some things, if you're delivering spots, we should talk for a minute about stuff like ISKI codes. The entire advertising industry works off of these, and if you don't have all of your deliverables keyed to these industry standard codes that the advertising world works with, that will also get you taken out of the process. One of my pandemic discoveries that really made my life easier was the world had broken down. This was like the first couple of weeks of the pandemic really getting serious. And so I had a buy going out. And I told them, look, I can't talk to anybody. The station people have all gone home. I'm going to put my master file up on Vimeo. I'm going to give you a link to it. See if you can use it. And to my great surprise, that was a 10-station buy. 8 of them said, yeah, it's fine. We'll use it. And they came back and said, and it looks great. So I did a big sigh of relief and said, oh my gosh, 8 out of the 10 can use this file. I only have 2 I have to work with. Those 2 were just as difficult as they'd ever been. One was an NBC owned and operated facility, and I had to upload the spot to a special thing. I had a picture of it here, but we're not going to get to see it. It's a digital delivery system that goes direct to the stations, or actually direct to NBC. So you're going to run into these anomalies if you want to do a whole buy distribution, and it's pretty quick. Then I got into the other one that's a problem for me recently has been Hulu. Hulu has, I don't know why, but I always have difficulty getting through QC at the Hulu delivery. It's one of those things where I don't get to talk to people mostly, and I often get rejects from their computer, and I have to go back and figure out what it is that their computer didn't like about this master. And I often trace that back to the file that the actual production company, if I didn't do it myself, there was something about the way they configured audio channels, or maybe they did a split with music on one track and voice on the other track. And by the time I send it out go through my whole process and send it out, they feel like there's a missing track or something. It gets very complicated. I'm going to say bravo to Scripps Howard, though, because just recently, and I wish you could see this because it's really cool, this one outlet has published a whole series of, if you're in Final Cut, if you're in Premiere, if you're in Avid, just make your settings conform to these pictures that we're giving you, and it will pass. And it changed everything for me. So if there's nothing else, please, 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 folks, do what Scripps Howard has done and make it easy for people to deliver. You'll get more work easier into your places. Let's get back to the regular questions.
All right, Courtney Gooden from Hollywood, California. Is there a separate master generated for archiving? And what do you use for long-term storage and future-proofing items, say for better displays or media 20 years from now?
And Alex is going to pop in on this, and so is Sky.
I believe that the way that the Hollywood does it, I thought Courtney might have mentioned it before, is that they literally print them to film, put them in underground. But Courtney can talk about that in more detail. From a standard production, one of the things that we try to make sure of is that we export it out as a final file. Like, here's my final file, and put it usually in 2 physical places that aren't in the same building, usually in the same geographic region, especially now that we have fires all the time. And then once in the cloud, for the things that are the most important, is keep them somewhere so that they can be available. So that's what we do from a digital perspective, and it's the highest quality we could deliver. It's not like an H.264 or whatever. It's whatever we could put out that's the final quality that we declare. Like this is as good as we could do. And that's what you want to make sure you save as an archive.
Sky?
I was working with Roush Media in Burbank, and again, what I observed was it depended on the budget of the producer. The distributor wanted just that one file that they would turn into the DCP, and then that would go to Universal or Sony or something, Fox or something like that. But the client would often, the offering that we had was put it onto an LTO, the entire file, because by the time we received it to do the finishing, we had all of the graphics, all of the latest last minute tweaks and the last minute color corrections, the last minute animations and things like that. So we were responsible for the best of whatever that product was. And that but the challenge with the LTO, of course, is even those change and you have to update your LTOs occasionally. So that was a way we stored all of the data.
Courtney?
Yeah, so I guess the answer is to save as high a resolution file as you can. I've noticed this came to the fore last night when I was watching one of the cable channels here. It plays Star Trek, and they start with the original series, and then they go to Next Generation, and they go to Deep Space Nine, and then Enterprise. So they work their way through the canon of Star Trek every night. And I noticed that the Next Generation looks really bad compared to the original. It's because the original was all shot on film and delivered on film and archived on film, and they've gone back to that original film negative and rescanned it at high def. However, the Next Generation, it was shot on film as well, but it was finished in online video because it was standard def at the time. And all of the special effects, all the compositing, all the lightning bolts and everything, all the animation, all the limited CGI or hand-drawn animation and stuff that was composited in visual effects was done at standard def. And so the masters were always standard def, and they had no way of going back and recreating a new high def master, because all they have is those original SD, saved tapes that are masters. So I wondered if they're going back and, as Alex mentioned, a lot of films, since they don't know what the future will be as far as digital formats go, they will shoot them out to motion picture film, in black and white motion picture film at that, because it has a long-term stability of the silver on an S-star base, and they stick it in YCM separations, a separate print for each color master, and stick it in a salt mine, because they know, at least in the future, if you can see it, you can transfer it to whatever the new medium is.
Salt mine. Interesting. Next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles, California. What is DCP and why is it needed?
Alex is going to explain.
Yeah, so DCP is a digital cinema package. It is a hard drive, typically called, I think, a DX115, I think is not a hard drive, but it's a storage, well, it is a hard drive, but it's a storage device that I believe is called a DX115, I think. And it basically they had to figure out, when they were moving from film to distribute to theaters, how do we build a standard that does a couple things? Number one is it works in every projector everywhere. We needed one standard. We talked about how the rules have changed for everything else, but they needed to be like, well, we have to be able to send it out to any theater, and the theater has to be able to open it and play it. It also has to be encrypted, so we have to be able to protect it, from other people. You're now sending, it was hard. If you stole the film canisters, all the reels, you might be 5 to 7 reels of film from a, when it was going to the theater, not a lot of places to play it. Like, what are you going to do with that film? So it was a little less interesting. But digital files, everyone would be really interested in that, because these are the full quality distribution quality anyway of the piece. So they had to have it encrypted, and they also wanted to be able to control, like, not only is it encrypted, but the theaters, this is something they didn't have with the film that they had the ability to do, is keep track of when can they play it. So who gets to play it from this hour, from this time. I've had a DCP go bad, right before a show because someone typed in the wrong numbers when they built what's called the key delivery message. So the KDM was not created correctly and we were in Cambodia and couldn't play the movie. Anyway, so we got it sorted out and there was a lot of upset. So those are the basic parts of the DCP. It has to be mastered. So a lot of times people will request you just to send, like literally sequences of TIFFs or sequences of, that they can push in because that's the least chance that something's going to go wrong. But we have delivered Apple ProRes to a house that can does that intermediate for us, to make that happen. But DCP is there to standardize and protect the content so that it can be easily distributed, and every movie theater and some people's houses have a DCP capable DCP player that's capable of putting it out.
Mitch?
Yeah, everything Alex said. It's very unlikely that you're going to have a DCP processor or software to create. You're going to have to work from your ProRes master or whatever it is that you're working from, and you got to make sure it's in the right aspect ratio so that the DCP can process it properly. We just did a job for a large theater chain, and it was very interesting because I got to see a whole process that we did the files the way they wanted them, and then we delivered them to the head of the chain, and then we watched them while they created the DCP files. And it's a whole specification. All kinds of things are decided in there, including like the encryption and other things. And then they roll in with the little player module into their Christie or Barco projectors. And I think they plug it into a Dolby processor that pre-processes it. Then it goes into the projector. Then it goes up on the screen. It's a neat thing.
Sky?
Yeah, and we would deliver them to Deluxe there in Burbank because they were the keepers of the keys, and they would hold your master. We would deliver an unencrypted one, then they would create the encrypted version, and it was also a delivery format in a hard drive, to Alex's point, to these different locations, and it was keyed down to the point of at this hour in this theater in this location. And so that was the bookkeeping of keeping your film secure and it not as a file going out to the world.
Next question.
I was just going to pull up one of the drives. I had it here. Next question is from Don Modine in Manchester, Connecticut. Can a master file ever be too large or does it not matter?
Courtney's going to weigh in on this.
Well, if it's a deliverable, it does matter. For archival, it's a little different story. Your files can be big and uncompressed, and as long as you have drives that can contain them or some storage media, LTO tape that can contain it, it shouldn't make too much difference because you're not playing them out necessarily in real time if there's just archival data. If it's a deliverable that's to be played out, then it can be too large. It can be at too high a bit rate for the deliverable to work. There's compression codecs have to be the right codecs that can deliver at a bit rate that is rated for streaming or rated for cable distribution or rated for satellite distribution. So it can be too large or it can be at too high a bit rate for it to handle, in which case it would have to be transcoded or re-encoded at a lower bit rate to make it fit into the transmission media.
Sky.
And we've discovered that here in our own distribution of content because some of the different files were too large because they were the master files, but the distribution is what we also care about, and consequently find out from your distributor what is the file that they need and in their delivery system. And I think I don't know, were your files too big, Bill? Were they master files?
Well, actually, that's what I was going to talk about. It depends on the content distribution network. And that's why these mezzanine transcodes that Vimeo and these people do, you send up a ProRes 422 master to them, which is a pretty large file. And it's going to automatically make maybe 6 versions stepped down in encoding, still the most commonly used out there. But constantly I've run into the circumstance where one of my clients has a sales team of 15 or 20 people, and they all have different laptops and they all have different iPads and they all have different necessities to play this content back at a point of sales circumstance. And so the rule is usually go up as high on the list as you can, test it ahead of time and make sure it plays back smoothly and without problems. And if you get drop frames or glitches of any kind, drop down to the next tier. It's still going to look good, but it's going to save you from having a file that's too big for your playout device to handle. Sky?
Yes, and I found that the cross-platform MP3s seem to be the safest on both Mac and Windows.
Yeah, the only trouble I see you get into is that if you tell everybody just download the lowest quality one at the bottom because it'll work everywhere, it will, but it can look awful if you're really trying to keep quality at the absolute height and you drop down to a poor quality just to keep it compatible with everybody. You're not really doing the work.
And the presets that come in Premiere and these, would you use those as a delivery? Like
sometimes the question is, yeah, sometimes you really do have to pay attention to what does the end user require. And all these services, I mean, Apple's compressor, the media encoder in Premiere, Avid has Avid exports, all of them are capable of getting a good file out. But each of them uses a different language. They it's really kind of complex, and you sometimes get a delivery manifest from a Hulu or I don't know, whoever else, Extreme Reach or something like. Well, Extreme Reach doesn't really matter because I'll take anything. But you get this file specification and you read it and you go, oh my gosh, they have so many specific things that they say it must be encoding at this bit rate with this many keyframes and that. And so you go into your software, which is different from the different manufacturers, and you try to figure out how to execute on that. That's why I'm so delighted that at least we're starting to see companies like Scripps say, in your software, make these changes and it will work for our station. That is way more consistent and reproducible than giving you giving everybody a big set of technical file specifications and having you have to execute that in your own software, which may use completely different terminology. It's a tough thing out there right now still. Next question. I hope I answered that at least reasonably.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas asks, what's the best online course to learn mastering?
Sky has a thought.
Well, I'm going to sound snarky, but Hard Knocks, because as you just heard Bill say that every distributor has found the best way to do that. And CBS does it one way. ABC does it a different way. Discovery Channel does it a different way. PBS does it a different, because they have put their configuration of tools and equipment together for their audience, and their engineers put that all together. So there is Full Sail as a school out in Florida, but again, just doing it and hanging out with these people.
I will also say this has changed so much recently, and I got to tell you a little story. Years ago, I had a spot to deliver to NBC. It was actually San Diego. I was still living back in Phoenix at the time, and I read through their specs and I tried to do the best I could, and it got rejected. And so I did it again and it got rejected. I finally got a call through to the woman in the back of the station in San Diego, and I said, please tell me what the actual specs are and how to get this done. She said, what are you using? And I said, well, I was in Final Cut, probably 7 back then. And she said, here's what you do. Go into the export, click this, and write 395 in the box to the right of that, and it will work. And I went, what are you telling me? You put me through 5 pages of specs when in point of fact, they could have given me one simple instruction that would have made all that go away. I wish more systems understood that making this more complicated, yes, it makes it harder for individuals to do it, and the companies who specialize in doing this for you for a nice rich fee get their money, but it doesn't have to be as difficult as they're making it. And I wish we could get a little political thing going to make all these people understand that the easier it is, the more work you will get for doing this. Oh, Alex had a thumb in here.
As far as learning how to do this, you just have to work with someone. I mean, as Sky talked about, you have to do it. Doing it by yourself is really hard. Like trying to learn this on your own, taking a course on it. I mean, those are all things that are useful so that you could get a job working somewhere. But the people that are doing mastering have usually been doing it for a while. Like it's not something that they just took a course and started doing it. So,
yeah, it's a little bit the Wild West still out there, and it shouldn't be, because it is a robust business. It's been around for years, and they should give us the keys to the kingdom, but they don't.
Everything at the expert level, nothing's plug and play. Nothing is something you can take. Everything is you're making critical decisions and you're problem solving, and that is everything that is being. When you say mastering something or putting something together, it's always going to take time to learn how to do it correctly.
Sky, quick thought before we move on.
Yeah, and it is the craft of the mastering. And if it were all automatic, I think we would lose some of the quality. Consequently, the fast edits would not compress well. The high contrast would not compress well. So if you can get somebody to do a little bit of tweaking on it, that's a useful thing.
And Bill, your audio is slipped way out.
Still slipped way out of sync.
Is there something different about your system today?
No, I'm there isn't, but maybe we're getting storms. It's been real humid here, and I think my cable connection gets a little iffy when it gets rainy. Usually
it would break up. It wouldn't, nor like it feels like your computer's being overdriven or something. It's usually not a connection issue, but yeah, you might want to restart again. We'll run with it.
Okay.
Next question.
Javier Alfaro in Mexico City, Mexico asked, is there a way to have control over YouTube's HDR to SDR conversion, or what is the best way of delivering an HDR video that also looks good on SDR?
Currently, I don't believe there's a way to control that. It's going to do it the way it's going to do it. The best way to do it is to master an HDR version and an SDR version and put them out there. You're not going to, if you really want that kind of control. I think that if you're not aggressive with the HDR, and that might be an HLG submission or an HDR10 without pushing too hard, you may end up with a better SDR solution there. But right now it's automatic. Next question.
Next question from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. What is the most common mistake from a content provider when providing a deliverable for broadcast?
Mitchell?
Inevitably, for me, it comes into, they say we need 6 megabytes per second or 10 megabits per second, and I've messed that up or forgotten it, and their computer rejects it.
Go ahead, Sky.
Oftentimes, it was the text and or the font. We would need to get a grid from the the end network, because they would always put up their little bugs. And if you had a font and their little bug went over it, that was a real challenge. So that would be a common one.
Yeah. The biggest common mistake is not reading the instructions. It almost always boils down to sending the file the way that you wanted to send it, not the way that they asked for it, and not discussing it with them. Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. In my edit software, there are several sets of bars that can generate. Apart from sending what your client specifies, is there a preferred set of bars? For example, EBU, SMPTE, etc.
It depends. Usually that's in the instructions that are there. I think the SMPTE are the ones that we see the most often. Bill, you ready to go? Want to give that another shot there?
Yeah, let's see if I'm lucky enough to be back in sync, at least somewhat. I'm not going to touch any other buttons on the system for the rest of the show. I'm just going to leave it alone. Okay, next question.
Robert Shoji from Los Angeles, California. What does the Broadcast Safe plugin do in Final Cut Pro?
It makes it broadcast safe. There are a set of standards for the maximum amplitude of all sorts of things, color particularly, but picture, luminance, and everything else. And if you exceed those, you can fail those. Sky, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I used it because it was the last safety gate for the delivery, again, to the technique. The person, it used to be a person watching the meters, but now it is the automation. So unfortunately, it will flatten your colors and or flatten your audio. So if you want to go in and make sure that your lighting is just right all the way through before it does that final, just flatten the top.
Yeah, and if you pull up the scopes, particularly the luminance scopes, you will see maybe some white pieces in your content that go above 100 IRE. You flop on the broadcast safe filter, and they're just going to be clamped to 100 IRE, and that's the limit for broadcast. So it's making it literally conform to the standards. Mitch?
Yeah, it generally is. It's a brick wall approach to fixing things, and I generally don't use it. Even on Premiere, it has its own plugin, and it does the same thing. Same thing goes for the audio. If you want to be a Dolby legal broadcast, they usually specify minus 20 LUFS. The things that it does to the audio is horrible.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, and this is a moving target because we're changing to ATSC 3. So broadcast safe has a different color gamut than digital projection and other types of transmission. So Broadcast Safe has to have the colors within the legal broadcast limits of SMPTE legal broadcast limits. So it will go in and adjust the color gamut to make sure none of your colors are outside the Broadcast Safe range, so that they don't clip or get into other problems, because it can cause problems if you're actually broadcasting that signal. It can cause deviations outside the broadcast and make the actual transmission illegal. So they have to do that. I remember on a show we worked on that was distributed in Germany, they shot, two cameras were shooting on Alexas, digital cameras, but they decided to shoot camera C as a Canon still camera, which we shot video on. And they finished it and it looked fine. But because of the color gamut of that particular camera, whenever they cut to camera C, they could never do a finish for Germany. So they rejected the masters because anything that had those C cameras shots in it would cause it to go outside their broadcast range. So you got to be very careful. We had to actually reshoot some stuff and stop using the Canons as a C camera.
Short response, Mitch?
Yeah, they're also going to hit it again once it gets to the broadcast facility. They're going to run it through their processing gear also. So remember, you start adding all these up and they start to do nasty things to the video.
All right, let's go to the next question.
Don Modine in Manchester, Connecticut. How is a movie remastered from theater release to streaming or physical media? Are they all done at the same time?
Alex.
Rarely. So every time it goes to a new format, it usually gets mastered again for that format. So everything is always you have the digital master, but how it gets back out, for streaming for every platform. Literally, there's a different set of instructions and a different set of requirements. And now sometimes that's batched for those things, but generally people are going to go through it and QC it for something that is the version that most people are going to see today. People spend a lot of time looking at it, except for, I won't say it. There's one platform that drives me a little crazy. I think that they master it well. I think they just don't distribute it very well. But generally there's a lot of care taken there.
Sky.
Yes, for the different formats, we had the 40-foot screen with a barcode projection, and the colorist would sit and color for the theatrical release. And then he would take that same digital file, go next door to the high-end screen monitor, and then he would recolor it according to that. And we have also had to do pan and scans because sometimes the delivery was still, well, this is several years ago, we had to deliver a 4:3 when it was shot in a 16:9. So that was making sure your image was in the middle of the shot.
Next question.
Joe Kidd from the Bay Area in California. Are the transcoding services mentioned prior superior in quality and or agility? That's what he used compared to software transcoders from Apple, Avid, or BlackMagic Design.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, probably. Here's the thing. If you put a good quality into a service like Extreme Reach, it's going to maintain the quality. They're professionals. They do this all day long as they're transcoding to things. Is it superior? Can a bespoke person who understands the back end do as good or maybe even better a job than any mass reproducing pipeline? Probably the answer is yes. So I think I'd give it a split there. What they are really selling is convenience. And I will note that Extreme Reach started as relatively small. They are a monster out there in the broadcast industry right now. This transcoding for spot delivery to any place on the planet is one small part of their corporate offerings. They are big in a lot of other things having to do with international broadcast distribution. So, Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know about all services are better, but for the larger services that do the transcoding, these are oftentimes very custom setups that are running on very powerful computers over a very long time to do the transcoding. For the largest providers, those are typically going through most of the streaming services, for instance, have their own process. They want your digital master, and then they'll do it the way they want to do it for their service. And so a lot of times they're doing that for you if you have a feature release that's going out.
Next question.
Next question from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Who are the world's greatest video masterers?
That's a tough question. I've never. Alex, you want to weigh in on it?
Secret team.
They never tell you their names.
It's usually not a person. It's a group of people that are working on it. What's interesting is that there are, in most of these houses, there are what's oftentimes referred to as golden eyes. So these are people who are super particular about color, about detail, about motion artifacts. There's just some people that, they have that eye for it, and they often refer to them as golden eyes. And they literally they're doing QC. They're watching a lot of things, and that's their job. And they look for it, and then they send back notes of, this motion. There's a motion error here. There's an artifact here. There's a, that kind of thing.
Sky.
Historically, Deluxe and Technicolor were the big animals or the big gorillas in Hollywood anyway. But there are a lot of other smaller houses as well that do the smaller projects.
And I just have to mention this also. Things are still changing so much. 15 years ago, I remember I did another one of those spots that I sent over there, and I said I want to call and talk to somebody, and they said, well, you realize that when you upload it to the server here at the station overnight sends it to Atlanta. Atlanta does all the work on it, and Atlanta feeds the spots into the entire NBC network, including your local station. So it really wasn't even being touched here. And in fact, Master Control at the TV station, a big NBC affiliate, was disbanded. And so it's likely that your files are going somewhere on the planet where a team of experts are doing all this stuff and then distributing them globally on the network, because that's the world we live in now. It's no longer a local phenomenon to do these kind of touch the file and make it right things. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana asked, if you were mastering for a standard def private cable TV system, playback through an RF converter on, say, channel 60, what would be the gotchas for 1080 content? Lots of senior centers have older distribution systems.
Alex.
Probably the biggest gotcha is whether it needs to be interlaced or not. So a lot of the older systems may not be able to see 2997p. They will need to be 5994i. That's going to be the thing that is the most likely thing that you'll have trouble getting 1080p is if it doesn't support progressive.
Courtney?
Another gotcha is if you're going to be playing it back on a 16:9 monitor is how you're doing, whether your original is going to be squeezed anamorphic and then unsqueezed. You'll get the best resolution if you put it out as squeezed. And so that when it plays back, it'll be unsqueezed and at full resolution. Otherwise, it's going to be cropped and letterboxed, which is going to mean your resolution is going to be reduced, greatly in the distribution network over that RF distributor, over the RF modulator, which is at standard def.
This is so true. And I always try, I fail a lot, but I always try to say what is it going to end up on the last thing? And if it's just end up on a 4x3 TV in somebody's bedroom, keep your fingers crossed that whole encoding process you've gone through is going to work for that, because that's an edge case now. Most everything's 16:9 and just works on a different HD as opposed to SD. And when you're transcoding between those, you can have problems show up, as he mentions. Courtney?
Yeah, and if you're doing that squeezed anamorphic version, your TV set has to be in the proper zoom mode to display that. Otherwise, everybody's going to look squeezed and tall, or stretched out and too wide, or it's going to be cropped top and bottom. And in a senior citizen's home, they're not very good at making the right adjustments on their individual TV sets. I'm going to tell you right now.
Absolutely. All right, last question of the day.
And it's a first-hour question from Alex Buckhead in North UK. Okay, it sounds like I need a new camera for good quality online meetings and live talks, etc. I've got $600 to spend. What do I get?
Alex?
I think that price point, the Sonys, there's a variety of Sonys with interchangeable lenses. I can't think of the name. I want to say 4200s and 6000s and 5400s. Those are in that range. I think that with a lens would probably, you can find some of them new and used. They have good autofocus and they are relatively inexpensive and they look great.
Okay, there's a solid thing. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate, and thank you to all the panelists who are here answering questions. It is a huge lift for everybody to show up here every morning. We love doing it, I think, generically, but without the panel, this show doesn't work. So thank you to everybody who has joined me today for this. Also to the back end crew who has been part of this for every day. You'll see all their names in the credits as they roll. We'll be back here tomorrow. So thank you for watching.
A couple house cleaning things. Number one is I just posted into the event chat the new after hours link. Remember, we're moving to the new after hours today. I also did an everyone, sorry for the everyone, to Discord to make sure that everyone knew that it was there. And so I didn't realize how many people had registered to after hours. I was thinking, it's a couple hundred. I'll just send out an email later or during the show. It's like almost 1,500 people that are registered to after hours. And so I have to use a different system. It will take me a little time to get set up. So anyway, so we'll get that out today. But anyway, we're looking forward to it. Go ahead and jump in, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you all.
Oh, and one more thing. Sorry, I'm not very good at this. No. Just a reminder that our 900th episode is on Sunday, so we'll be talking about that. It's really on Saturday, but we're celebrating on Sunday because IBC is on Saturday. It's very complicated. Okay, now I'm done.
Okay. Thank you all. We'll see you tomorrow.
I was going to be
just bake a cake big enough to hold 900 candles.
900 candles. That would take a long time. I don't think we're allowed to create a cake like that in Northern California. Holding my breath. We might get a forest fire. It's like they burned down the whole block because they had to build the cake. 900.
Bring up the test stuff and test my old system. I don't know what was going on today, but I'm sorry.
I think that we would need a flamethrower to light it. Like it would just graze across the top, like just. Maybe you could do it with like a little laser. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise,
for everyone,
get to the end, or we'd have to have a huge team.
Like a creme brulee.